Good evening, all of you. Let us revise Ind AS 113, that is fair value measurements. The name of the Ind AS is, yes, Ind AS 113 fair value measurement, but there is no related AS over there. There is no related AS. So we have that specifically in Ind AS because fair value concept is given more importance in Ind AS. And we have converged from IFRS. In your IFRS, you have IFRS 13 over there, and over here we have Ind AS 113. Now in this Ind AS 113 fair value measurement, what we'll be doing is we will be calculating the fair value. Now we won't be passing any journal entry, we won't be deciding the date on which journal entry is passed, date on which accounting is done, what journal entry is passed. We will be just calculating the fair value in this Ind AS. So let us say Ind AS 41 tells us that on the reporting period end I want fair value for my journal entry. So accounting date etc will be given by Ind AS 41, but this Ind AS 113 will help in calculation of fair value. Okay, so purpose is very clear, no journal entry, no specific date. When a particular Ind AS tells on this date give me fair value, the Ind AS 113 will come and give the fair value. Next, when we calculate fair value of an asset or a fair value of a liability or fair value of equity, whatever fair value we calculate, that will be the market based value and it will not be an entity specific value. Okay, so I want to calculate fair value of asset, I want to calculate fair value of liability, I want to calculate fair value of it will be a market based value, it will not be entity specific. When I do entity specific, then I can say what use I will be doing etc. So that is not considered, it is considered based on market based value. Further, whenever you are valuing, fair valuing, you consider the exit price. Means if you have asset, then you will try to determine the amount which you will receive on selling the asset. If there's a liability, you will try to determine amount which will be paid to transfer the liability, means to remove that asset or liability. That price is considered as a fair value. So fair value gives more importance to the exit price. It does not consider the entry price. Further, it considers the exit price which is market based, exit price which is market based in a normal transaction, and not in a stressed or pressured transaction. So in a normal transaction in a market, what will be that exit price? That is important. If a person is under stress, then it might be a different price, that is not considered. Okay, so this is the base crux of this Ind AS. The objective of Ind AS is it will help you to measure the fair value. Okay, and when you measure that fair value, one of the objective which you need to keep in mind is you will try to maximize the use of observable inputs and you will try to minimize the use of unobservable inputs. Now observable inputs means things which help in calculation. Inputs are the things which help in valuation. So when we want to calculate fair value, there will be certain inputs which will help us to calculate that fair value. If it's an observable input, means it is taken from the market data which is readily available for the market participants. Example, quoted price of the shares, so that is readily available in the market, or else it can be credit ratings etc. So whenever we are calculating fair value, we'll try to maximize the use of observable inputs which are observable from the market data, and we'll try to minimize the use of unobservable input, means that input which are not observable from the market data you will have to frame on your own. Okay, so market data available, observable inputs, market data not available, unobservable input, but you will try to maximize the use of observable input, you will try to minimize the use of unobservable input. Now further, the calculations of this fair value will be based on the assumption which a market participant makes and not entity specific I am talking about. Okay, then this Ind AS will study the calculation of fair value, but this Ind AS will concentrate more on calculation of fair value of assets, more on calculation of fair value of liability. But still, sometimes even a fair value of equity can also be calculated, own equity can also be calculated in this Ind AS. So yes, this Ind AS will help us in calculation of fair value of asset, liability, own equity also, but more focus will be on the assets, liability as compared to entities' own equity. Next, if you come to this Ind AS, it says that whenever any other Ind AS requires fair value, come to me, I will give them fair value. Means this standard helps in measurement and disclosure. On initial measurement or maybe on subsequent measurement, the measurement and disclosure of the fair value, maybe initial measurement, maybe subsequent measurement, this standard helps in that measurement disclosure. Now this standard does not give you the journal entry, it does not give you the date of entry, it does not give you the accounting, it gives you the measurement and the disclosure aspects. Now examples where fair value are required is as per Ind AS 105. When you need to calculate fair value less cost to sell, that fair value thing, calculation will be as per 113, measurement disclosure as per 113. Similarly, when you want fair value FVTPL, fair value through P&L, or FVTOCI, fair value through OCI, and Ind AS 109, measurement of that will be as per 113. Okay. Then next, as per Ind AS 16, if you are following revaluation model, you need fair value on the date of revaluation. Calculation will be as per 113, measurement disclosure as per 113. Now there are some things which are not covered in this standard, and in that it is divided into two parts. In the first part, the measurement and disclosure both are not applicable. Means there are some things where neither the measurement of 113 nor the disclosure of 113 is applicable. They will be measured, disclosed as per other standard. That is share-based payment of 102. Share-based payment of 102, they will be measured, disclosed, accounted, everything as per 102, not over here. Further, leases of 116, leases of 116, they will be measured, disclosed, accounted, everything as per 116, not over here. Further, there are some things which are similar to fair value but they are not fair value. Example, NRV of Ind AS 2, value in use of Ind AS 36. So that things neither will be measured nor be disclosed as per 113. They will be measured, disclosed as per their respective standard. Okay, then comes there certain disclosure exclusion. Disclosure exclusion means measurement will be as per 113 but disclosure will not be as per 113. Example, fair value of a plan asset as per Ind AS 19. Now fair value of plan asset as per Ind AS 19, accounting as per Ind AS 19, but measurement as per 113. Okay, measurement will be as per 113 but disclosure will not be as per 113. Disclosure will be as per that other standard. Similarly, in your Ind AS 36, when you want to calculate recoverable amount, you calculate fair value less cost of disposal. So that fair value amount will be calculated over here in 113, but the disclosure as per 36. Okay, so there are some things in which measurement, disclosure both is removed from the standard. In some things only disclosure is removed from the standard, measurement still as per the standard. Okay. Now what do you mean by fair value? Fair value is a price, it's an amount, it's a price that will be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability. Means it's an exit price in an orderly transaction. In an orderly transaction means a proper transaction between whom? Between market participants. Market participants are those people who act independently. You know, they act independently, they are knowledgeable, etc. So fair value is the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction, in a proper transaction, that too between market participants and at measurement date. See, measurement date will be given by that respective standard, but on that date calculation will be as per 113 in respective cases. Now when we want to calculate this fair value and when we want to study that in detail, the definition of this fair value, we need to consider certain concepts. So concept starts over here. Concept number 1 of fair value definition. Now there are certain restrictions which are asset liability specific, and there are certain restrictions which are entity specific. So while calculating fair value of an asset or liability, should we consider asset liability specific restriction? Should we consider entity specific restriction? That's a question mark over there. So when we clearly know that the fair valuation is based on market perspective and not on entity's perspective, and therefore it is very clear that if there are certain restrictions which are entity specific, they are ignored while doing fair value calculation. But if there are certain restrictions which are asset or liability specific restrictions, means they are transferred along with that asset or liability, they are not entity specific, then they are considered in fair value calculation. Okay, we had considered examples of the same also. Next, unit of account. That's the second concept. Now, when you want to calculate the fair value, should you calculate fair value on the basis of group of assets or liabilities, or should you calculate the fair value based on individual assets and individual liability? Means how? Unit of account, aggregation, disaggregation. Ind AS, this Ind AS is that I will not tell. Another Ind AS who requires fair valuation, that will take that fair value should be calculated on aggregated basis, means group of assets or liability, or individual basis. That will be told by that other Ind AS who wants that fair value. I will not tell. But there is one exception, and if that falls under this exception, in that case, this standard will tell that we will measure the fair value on net basis. Means if there are assets and liabilities, we'll net off that assets and liabilities and then calculate fair value of the net assets or liabilities if it falls under exception to the standard. And what is this exception to the standard? That will be studied in some time. So normally, whether you need to calculate fair value of group of assets, liability or individually, that depends upon other Ind AS. But there is one exception. If it falls under that exception of this standard, then the fair valuation will be done on net basis. Means group of assets and liabilities net off and then fair valuation will be done. What is that exception? We'll study with time. That was the second concept of fair valuation. Third concept of fair valuation. Now, when you want to calculate the fair value, you need to see the fair value from an orderly transaction. Now, orderly transaction means a transaction in the principal market if there is a principal market. So you need to find out a transaction, orderly transaction in which market? Proper transaction in which market? Principal market. Now, what do you mean by principal market? Principal market means a market with highest volume and high level of activities. If there are multiple markets and one of them has highest volume with high level of activity, then it is known as principal market, and a price in that principal market will be considered as a transaction, will be considered as a price for fair value purpose, and that will be that orderly transaction which will help in fair value. But many a times it happens that you don't get the principal market. There is no principal market. If there is no principal market, then what you need to do? Then you need to search something known as most advantageous market and then take a price of that orderly transaction from a most advantageous market. Okay. Now, what do you mean by most advantageous market? For calculation of most advantageous market, what you will do? If there's an asset, then you try to maximize the amount that will be received on selling an asset. If there's a liability, you will try to minimize the amount paid on transfer of that liability. This market will be the most advantageous market. Let us say there are two markets, market A and market B, and I have an asset. So if I go and sell that asset in market A, what will happen? If I go and sell the asset in market B, what will happen? I will have to see, and if it's an asset, I will try to maximize the amount that will be received, and if the maximum amount is received in market A, then the market A is the most advantageous market. Accordingly, we calculate the most advantageous market. So for calculation of most advantageous market, you consider net proceeds. So if it is a sale of asset, the net proceed from sale of asset will be the gross amount minus the transaction cost minus the transport cost. That is the net proceed. You will calculate the net proceed from all the markets, and maximum net proceed will be considered as most advantageous market. Now, is this your fair value weight? No. Now, when you compare the net proceeds, what you get is the most advantageous market. Once the most advantageous market is done, then in that most advantageous market, you will check a orderly transaction, and from that orderly transaction, you will calculate the fair value. So fair value calculation is a next step. One more step is there. So over here, we are just trying to find out whether we should take a orderly transaction in a principal market or whether we should take a orderly transaction in most advantageous market. If principal market is there, that principal market is selected. If principal market is not there, then most advantageous market is selected, and from that most advantageous market, we will take a orderly transaction, and in the next step, we will calculate the fair value. Now, most advantageous market means what you need to do? Net proceeds. If it is inflow, you need to maximize it. If it's outflow, you need to minimize the same. Net means consider all the things and then consider net inflow, net outflow. Okay, next. Fourth concept of fair valuation is market participants. Now, in that market, once you decide that market, whether it's a principal market or whether it's a most advantageous market, in that market, you need to find out market participants. Okay, and then orderly transaction done by that market participants, from that fair value will be calculated. Who are these market participants? Market participants are those persons who act in their best economic interest, in their own self best economic interest. They act, they are independent, they are not related parties. Even if they are related parties, sometimes they can be considered as market participants provided they deal at arm's length price. So normally a market participant will be considered as a market participant only if it is independent. Sometimes even a related party can be considered as a market participant who acts in their best economic interest if they transact at arm's length price. Further, that party should not be under any stress. They should have sufficient reasonable information. Then that parties can be considered as market participants, means they are the proper parties, and that can help us to decide the price. And now comes the price, the last little part where fair valuation will be done. See, now what we know that we are calculating the fair value of an asset or liability. So we already know whether we'll go to most advantageous market or whether we'll go to principal market. If principal market is there, then we go to principal market. If principal market is not there, we'll go to most advantageous. In that, we'll try to find out orderly transaction between that market participants. Once we reach over there, now we'll try to calculate the fair value from that transaction. Now the fair value is the amount that will be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in a orderly transaction in that principal or most advantageous market at the measurement date in the current market condition. So at the measurement date in the current market condition, whatever is that price, means the measurement date will be given by that other index. On that date, whatever is that price in that proper market between that proper market participants, that will be considered. Now what we'll do, obviously we'll try to maximize the use of observable data and we'll try to minimize the use of unobservable data, but sometimes we have to consider both. So whether we consider observable data or we consider other valuation technique, means unobservable data, no problem, but we'll be calculating the fair value. Obviously we know in our mind that we'll try to maximize the use of observable data, we'll try to minimize the use of unobservable data, and we'll get that fair value. And when that we get the fair value, we need to take care of two things, the transaction cost and the transport cost. Now while calculating fair value, we should make sure that transaction costs are not considered, because transaction costs are not characteristic of asset liability, they are characteristic of transaction. So let us say I'm selling an asset and there's some transaction cost of STT etc. They are not considered in calculating fair value. Separately they might be considered in cost of disposal. Now that is not my lookout. In this standard, my lookout is just fair value calculation. So when we calculate the fair value, we do not consider the transaction cost, because transaction cost does not change the characteristic of the asset. However, while calculating the fair value, we consider the transport cost, because transport cost can change the characteristic of asset, and it can change a characteristic of asset known as location of the asset. So while calculating the fair value of the asset, transaction cost is not considered, but transport cost is considered, and accordingly you calculate the fair value. Now you need to understand two different things. One is the net proceed and one is that fair value calculation. Now when is net proceed required to be calculated and when is the fair valuation required to be calculated? You need to understand that net proceed was here. Net proceed was calculated just to decide that most advantageous market. Net proceed was used to decide only that most advantageous market. So while calculating the net proceeds of an asset, we took up the gross proceeds minus the transaction cost minus we got that net proceed. Once we got that net proceed, then we decided most advantageous market. Let us say do two markets, market A and market B, and we calculate net proceeds from both market A and market B. Then we decided market A is the most advantageous market. Okay, fine. Once that is decided, when you calculate the fair value, that will be a separate exercise altogether. If market A is the most advantageous market, that decision is done. Then in market A, what is the fair value? Then if it's an asset, the sale proceed minus only the transport cost, because transaction costs are not considered in fair value calculation. And therefore this slide, that when we are doing fair value calculation, transaction costs, they are not considered in fair value calculation because they are not a characteristic of asset or liability. However, transport costs, they are characteristic of asset, so they are considered. So if you want to calculate fair value of some goods sold asset, then you will first find out fair value in that principal or most advantageous market minus the transaction cost to bring that goods to that principal or most advantageous market. That will be subtracted, and then you will get the ultimate fair value. So this is a very critical thing, and that thing gets clarified. So you can read this few things over there. That things get clarified from this. You need not read certain paragraphs from the textbook which I have cut. Okay, then you can come to your test your knowledge, and in your test your knowledge, that becomes very clear that in the question number 1, what happens is they give you two markets over there and they give you all the data, and you need to calculate fair value. In the first question, they ask calculate the fair value if A is the principal market. Now if there is a principal market, then we don't find only most advantageous market. If A is the principal market, directly we'll get the fair value from the market A, and in market A the price is 26, transaction cost is 3, and the transport cost is 2. Transaction costs are not considered, but the transport cost is considered. So 26 minus 2, 24 is the fair value. That's it. But in second part of that question, they ask to calculate fair value if none of them is the principal market. If none of them is the principal market, then first you will have to find out what is the most advantageous market. For calculating most advantageous market, in market A, what I do 26 is the selling price minus 3 and minus 2, 21 is the net proceed over here. In market B, 25 is the selling price, 1 and 2, 23 is the net proceed. So we try to first 22 is the net proceed over here. Now once we get the net proceed, we decide the most advantageous market. If there's an asset, then maximum amount which is issued, so most advantageous market becomes B. Now once we decide the most advantageous market, the fair value is very simple. The fair value, when you once the decision of most advantageous market is done, that part is done, B is decided, fair value will be a separate calculation. So while calculating fair value, we'll consider the sale price, transaction cost will not be considered, only transport cost of 2 will be considered, and the fair value will be considered as 23 over there, provided there is no principal market. So accordingly you calculate, and that is a very critical part of this Ind AS. Okay, so that was all about that point. Now I go ahead. So this is how basically we calculate the fair value. So, and when we are done with this price point, that's a fifth concept of fair valuation. Fair value basic concept is done. Now we apply this fair value once what we have studied in fair value to different things. So now comes the application part, the extra concepts part. First we apply the fair value rules to non-financial asset. Applying fair value rules to non-financial asset, sir, why it is given separately? Now non-financial assets generally do not have active market available, and therefore in case of non-financial assets we want to calculate fair value. Therefore standard permits you to use highest and best use as a reference point for calculating fair value. Why? Because this non-financial asset generally do not have active market, so that it becomes very difficult to calculate the fair value. Okay, and this best and the highest use becomes a reference point for calculating the fair value for non-financial assets like land, etc. But whatever is that best, highest and best use, that should be physically possible, legally permissible, and financially feasible. Further, that should be from market participant point of view and not dependent on what entity wants to do. So if I have an asset, I need to calculate fair value of that non-financial asset. I can use the best and highest use as a reference point for the same, and that best and highest use should be based on market participants' perspective and not on my perspective how I want to use the asset. Okay. Further, normally what you need to do is you need to identify the different market participants which can be there and how they can use them. So you will get to know what are the uses of that asset, and accordingly you can try to calculate the best and the highest use and therefore the fair value. Further, if there is a specific restriction only for the specific entity, the entity specific restrictions will not be considered, they will be ignored. Okay. Then next, if it is not possible to exhaust all the uses before getting the best use, it's fine, they say. You can just evaluate what are the uses possible, and out of this seems to be best use. You can consider that. Even if you don't evaluate all the uses, it's fine, because practically it's impossible to list down all the list. So if you have understood that these are the uses, out of this should only be the best, management judgment is there, then you need not list any other use which you think is not important. Okay, sometimes if it is not possible to find out best use, even the current use can be considered as best use over there. So this is a bit of theory, but yes, in case of non-financial asset, highest and best use can be a reference point for calculating the fair value of that non-financial asset, and that should be based on market participant perspective and not on entities, not based on just entity perspective. Okay, next. Further, while calculating this best and highest use, sometimes you can calculate this best and highest use in combination with other assets. Sometimes you can calculate this best and highest use on standalone basis. So you need to check what are the uses. You need to check how these assets are normally used in the market. So normally in the market, if these assets are used in combination, and that is demonstrated also because many market participants use in that way, so maybe the best and highest use is calculated in combination with other asset. It depends. So I'm calculating the best and highest use of an asset known as land, and there are many uses of the land, and one of the uses in combination with the other assets. So I can take up that use also. In that I can calculate total value of all the assets in combination, and out of that I will subtract the value of other assets and get the value of land. So this best and highest use can be calculated in combination with other assets, or it can be calculated on standalone basis. That is fine. Okay, so that was a bit of theory on that. Next comes how to calculate fair value of liabilities and entities' own equity instrument. Many a times it happens that you are required to calculate fair value of your liabilities, fair value of your own equity instrument, maybe because you are issuing them as a purchase consideration in business combination, and you need to value it at fair value as per Ind AS 103. So there might be many reasons why you are required to calculate fair value of your liability, fair value of entity's own equity instrument. You know, the best thing for calculating fair value of the liability or entity's own equity instrument, that is the direct quoted price available from the market for the identical instruments. Means for our instrument, only if there's a direct quoted price, then consider that price and that will be considered as a fair value. But many a times the direct quoted price is not available. In case of direct quoted price is not available, then we'll be using observable, unobservable inputs. We'll try to maximize the use of observable data. We'll try to minimize the use of unobservable data. Now, in that, two scenarios is given over there. Scenario number one is like this, that scenario number one is like this, that we are trying to calculate fair value of our liability or fair value of our equity instrument, own equity instrument, and but that is held by other parties as asset. If it is held by other parties as asset, then no problem. First though, we consider the direct quoted price. If the direct quoted price is not available for our liability or our own equity instrument, then what we can do is we can consider price of similar liability or equity instrument which are held by market participants as asset. So if our own means identical liability or equity instrument direct quoted price is not available, then we can consider the price of similar is a bit different thing, similar liability or equity instrument which is held by market participants as asset. So if that is also not available, then we can use other observable inputs like credit rating, etc. So if other observable input is also not available, then you can use either income approach or market approach to calculate the fair value. That is the last option, that is valuation technique they are known as. So first priority always is given to the direct quoted price of identical liability or equity. If that is not available, then we can take up prices of similar liability or equity which is held by other parties as asset. If that is not available, then we can use other observable inputs. Okay, if that is also not possible, then we can use valuation techniques like income approach, market approach. That's the last thing. Now, if we want to calculate fair value of the liability or own equity instrument, but that is not held by other party as asset. Example, I have a liability provision for claim where someone has filed a case against me and that's my liability, but that is not held by other party as asset because he has not recorded it as asset. In that case, if you want to calculate fair value of that liabilities or equity instrument which is not held by other party as asset, then the only thing which will be done over there is valuation techniques. You will have to use the valuation technique and get them. Next comes financial assets and financial liabilities with offsetting position. Example is like this. Let us say we have foreign currency debtors which is our financial asset, and we also have foreign currency creditors which is our financial liability. Let us say foreign currency debtors is $2 lakh and foreign currency creditors is $3 lakh. Debtors are receivable after 3 months, creditors are payable after 3 months. So we have foreign currency debtors, foreign currency creditors, they are financial assets and financial liabilities with offsetting position, where $2 lakh is receivable after 3 months and further $3 lakh is payable after 3 months. Now, in case of foreign currency debtors, there is a risk known as foreign currency risk. But you know what we can do? We can manage them on net basis. 2 lakh is receivable, 3 lakhs is payable, means net only 1 lakh is payable, and we have a foreign currency risk for net 1 lakh payable. So what we can do, when we are hedging it, we can just hedge that 1 lakh payable. Okay, we can hedge them on net basis. So this standard says that you need to understand how much I have marked, that much only. If there are financial assets or financial liabilities with offsetting position in market rates or counterparty risk, then if the entity manages that group of financial assets and liabilities on the basis of their net exposure either to the market risk like foreign currency risk or credit risk, then entity is permitted to apply exception to the standard. What do you mean by this? Entity is permitted to apply exception to the standard. It means that there's one exception where normally whether you want to aggregate or whether you want to calculate the fair values individually, that depends on other Ind AS, but there's an exception, and that exception is covered over here. Means if there are group of financial assets and group of financial liabilities and they are on the basis of the net exposure to the risk they are managed, then entity is permitted to apply the exception. Means entity can calculate the fair value on net basis, and this is what this standard says. See, normally whether you will calculate the fair value on gross basis or net basis, that will be given by other standards, but as an exception, if you have financial assets and financial liabilities, you're managing them on the basis of net exposure either to market risk or credit risk, then entity is permitted to calculate the fair value on net basis, and this is what is given in this standard as an exception. Clear? That much is the only part of this thing. You can ignore rest part. Next comes is a difference between the transaction price and the fair value. Transaction price is basically the entry price and the fair value is basically the exit price. You know, whenever I buy the asset, whatever I pay or whenever I take the loan, whatever I receive, that's the entry price of an asset or liability. That's known as the transaction price. It's different from the fair value, because fair value is the exit price. Now, so what is the problem over there? See, transaction price, entry price, paid to acquire an asset, received to assume a liability. Fair value, exit price, means received to sell an asset, paid to transfer a liability, exit price. Now, many times it can happen that some Ind AS tells you that you need to account based on fair value, and fair value is different from the transaction price. Example, Ind AS 109 tells that financial asset should be initially recorded at fair value, but the fair value is different from transaction price. So what will happen is, when you pass an entry, financial asset account debit fair value to cash bank, that will be the transaction price, and that the entry does not tally, no problem. They say fair value can be different from transaction price. Transaction price is at cash bank, no problem, no problem. And if an Ind AS requires initial measurement of asset or liability at fair value, and that is different from transaction price, that entry will not tally, no problem. Difference will either go to P&L, or if any other Ind AS requires otherwise, that difference can also go to OCI. So where does that difference go in that journal entry? No, that will be defined, that difference will either go to P&L or OCI depending upon other standard, because this standard will never give you journal entry. Okay, so now they just want to say that fair value can be different from transaction price, and if some Ind AS requires you to account based on fair value, and that is different from transaction price, so there can be difference in that journal entry. That difference can go to P&L or OCI depending upon that other standard only. I am just telling that difference can be there, and they are different. Fair value is different and the transaction price is different. Fair value is the exit price and the transaction price is the entry price. Next comes the valuation technique. Now, what do you mean by valuation techniques? Many a times you need to use valuation techniques because there is no direct quoted price available. See, if direct quoted price is available, we won't be using valuation technique. Obviously, when we apply the standard, what is our objective? We'll try to maximize the use of observable data, and we'll try to minimize the use of unobserved. We'll try to use quoted market price as the best thing which is available for fair value. Okay, but many a times we have to use valuation technique. So while we use the valuation technique, also we need to keep one thing in mind, that we'll still try to maximize the use of other observable inputs, maybe in the form of credit ratings, etc., or market interest rates, and we'll still try to minimize the use of unobservable inputs, even if we are doing the valuation techniques. But it is clearly given that if quoted market prices are available, then we need not consider the valuation approach further also. And which valuation approach we need to apply? There are different valuation approaches. Which valuation approach we need to apply? That's a matter of judgment. Entity will have to use the judgment. Now there are three approaches in valuation technique also. Market approach is there, income approach is there, and cost approach is there. So whenever you are required to use valuation techniques, maybe because quoted market price is not available, etc., then there are valuation techniques like market approach, income approach, cost approach. You can use this valuation technique to calculate the fair value. Obviously, one thing you will keep in mind, that you will at least try from your bottom of your heart, that you will try to maximize the use of observable data, and you will try to minimize the use of unobservable data. What do you do in market approach? In the market approach, you try to use market variables. Market approach, you try to use the market variables for identical assets, liabilities, or group of assets, liability. Example, some other person transacted a sale of business, and he used a P ratio of 8. Now I also want to calculate the fair value of my business, and that business and my business are similar. So maybe I can also use that P ratio of 8, or maybe I can adjust and use that. So that P ratio, price earning ratio, is that market multiple. For example, valuation technique consisting of market approach often use market multiples like P ratio. Obviously, that assets liability or group of assets liability should be similar. Then only we can use any other person's P ratio for us. Next comes income approach. In income approach, what do you do? If you want to calculate fair value of asset, liability, etc., as per income approach, you try to project or estimate the future cash flows. You discount that future cash flows by a particular rate, and you get the present value of future cash flow. That present value of the future cash flow is the single amount. Present value of the future cash flow is a single amount which is a representative of all future cash flows. So that's an income approach. But in income approach, future cash flows are taken, DCF is applied, and a single PV, present value of future cash flows, is calculated, a single amount is calculated. While you are using income approach, then what you can do is, you can try to adjust the risk and uncertainties either in the cash flows, or you can try to adjust the risk and uncertainties either in the discount rate, as we had studied in Ind AS 36, something like that. So yes, because risk and uncertainties are there, either you will adjust that risk and uncertainties in the cash flows, or you will adjust the risk and uncertainties in the DCF. But accordingly, you will try to apply the income approach and get the present value of future cash flows. So income approach, you try to calculate the present value of future cash flows. In income approach, you can try to calculate the present value of future cash flows. I'm repeating it. Okay. And when you are using the income approach while calculating the present value of future cash flows, the risk and uncertainties can either be adjusted in the cash flows, or it can be adjusted in the DCF. Okay. There are different ways of income approach. You can use present value techniques, you can use Black-Scholes model or binomial model as given in SFM. So that's all about that income approach. To brief it up again, income approach, what we do in income approach? In income approach, all the future cash flows we try to estimate, and we convert that future cash flows into one single amount by applying the discount rate. If there are risk and uncertainties, that risk and uncertainties can be adjusted either in the cash flows or in the DCF, as we do in Ind AS 36 or something like that. There are different ways of calculating value as per income approach. Either you can use PV of future cash flows, or you can use Black-Scholes model, or you can use binomial model as studied in SFM. That's all about that income approach. Next is the cost approach. Now what is this cost approach? Okay. Now in your cost approach as a valuation technique, you can use replacement cost as a fair value over there, but that's a last thing means to do, where you try to say if similar asset, if I want to replace, then how much it will cost. That is the replacement cost, and that can be used as fair value, but that's a last thing, because fair valuation gives more important to exit price rather than entry price. And that's all about that valuation technique. Now the only part left in the standard is the inputs to valuation technique. Now when you're using valuation techniques, there are three types of inputs which you can use, three levels of input we can use, and the hierarchy is given. The inputs which you use to calculate fair value is divided into three levels: level 1 input, level 2 input, level 3 input. And obviously level 1 input is the best one, next comes the level 2 input, next comes the level 3. So hierarchy is given based on the inputs which you use to measure the fair value. Level 1 inputs are the best inputs which you can use to measure the fair value, and they are the quoted price of identical assets and liabilities. So if I want to calculate the fair value of investment made in the shares of Reliance, I can just go to BSE and get the quoted market price of the Reliance share. Maybe I am having share number 1 to 10 and some other person is having share from 10 to 11 to 20, no problem, but they are identical assets and liabilities. So level 1 input is using the quoted market price in the active market. Quoted market price in which market? Active market, for identical assets and liabilities on the measurement date. If you use that, that's the best thing. Clear? So what are level 2 inputs? Level 2 inputs they are also observable inputs, but other than level 1 inputs. There are another observable inputs other than I can say there are other observable inputs other than level 1 inputs. They are known as level 2 inputs. Example is quoted market price, but of similar asset or liability, not identical asset liability. It is similar, so we'll have to do certain adjustments. Then there can be quoted market price of identical or similar assets and liabilities, but not in active market. Then there can be other observable inputs like interest rates, credit spreads, etc. They are level 2 inputs. They are observable, but they are not level 1 input. You will have to adjust it and use it back. So what are level 2 inputs? I'll repeat. See, level 1 inputs were the quoted market price in the active market for identical assets and liabilities. Okay. Level 1 inputs are the quoted price in the active market for identical assets or liabilities, where you are doing no adjustments. Level 2 inputs are observable data only, but they are not level 1 inputs. So some adjustments are done, like quoted market price, not of identical but similar assets liability. Quoted market price for identical or similar assets liability, but not in active market. Or maybe interest rates, credit spreads, etc., which are observable input. They are level 2 inputs. Level 3 inputs are unobservable inputs. You should try to minimize the use of level 3 inputs. Level 3 inputs are unobservable inputs. You should try to minimize the use of level 3 inputs. Example of level 3 inputs is a forecast of future cash flows developed using some entity data. Now this is unobservable data, so that is level 3 input. So that's all about that inputs. Disclosures are once read for you all. and that's all about that revision of Ind AS 113. Test your knowledge, you can go through the test your knowledge quickly. Some are subjective. Question 3, 4, 5 of your test your knowledge, they are SFM based. So first if you do SFM mergers and equation and then you do that test your knowledge, so that will be beneficial. So yes, we are done with the quick revision of Ind AS 113. Hello everyone, let us quickly revise Ind AS 24 related party disclosures. Now, there can be certain related party relationships which can affect the profit and loss, which can affect the financial position of the entity. There can be certain transactions which are entered by the entity with the related party which may not be entered with any unrelated party, and there can be transactions which with unrelated party but they can get influenced because of related party relationships. Example, A and B are not related. A was buying the goods from B, but the holding company of A told do not buy from B. So automatically the transaction with unrelated party gets affected because of related party relationships, and that can affect your P&L and that can affect your financial position. And hence the users of the financial statement should have knowledge regarding that related party relationships, related party transactions, outstanding balances, commitments. This will affect the user's assessment regarding the operations of the entity, the risk and the opportunities faced by the entity. Okay, the objective of this standard is that disclosures are there. Disclosure standard it is. Disclosure regarding related party relationships, related party transactions, outstanding balances with the related party, commitments with the related party. We can give the disclosure over there. We can bring the attention of the users over there and they can understand the same. Scope of the standard, what we will be doing in this standard, we will be identifying the related party relationships, then we'll be identifying the related party transactions, then we'll be identifying the outstanding balances between that entity and the related party. We'll identify the commitment between the entity and the related party. We will identify the circumstances in which disclosures regarding the same will be required, when we should disclose basically. Next, if we are required to disclose, the next comes is what we need to disclose, determining the disclosures. That all will be discussed in this standard. Further, disclosures have to be made in individual financial statements, or you can say disclosures have to be made in consolidated financial statements, separate financial statements. So if you are making individual financial statements, disclosures are required. If you are making consolidated financial statements, disclosures are required. If you are making separate financial statements, disclosures are required. Meaning of consolidated financial statements, separate financial statements and individual financial statements are discussed in detail in their respective standard. Next, many times it can happen that when you are making consolidated financial statements, there can be certain intra-company transactions which get eliminated. So they are related party transactions, but they have already got eliminated. Then how to disclose? Okay, if few things are eliminated, then they cannot be disclosed. Okay. However, if the transactions don't get eliminated, then you will have to disclose. Sometimes it can happen. In case of investment entities, now we don't consolidate as an exception given in certain Ind AS, which you will study in Ind AS 110. If you have not consolidated, things have intragroup transactions are not eliminated. If they are not eliminated, then you have to disclose it as a related party relationships and transactions. Further, sometimes it can happen that this standard requires disclosure, but your duty of confidentiality under any statute, regulation prohibits you from making any disclosure. In that case, then you will not be making the disclosure. Similarly, if there's a prohibition by any statute regarding disclosure, then you will not be making the disclosure even if the standard requires. Then we start with the definitions of the standard. Related party can be a person also. Related party can be an entity of related to reporting entity also. So I am a reporting entity. A person can be related to me. Any other entity can be related to me. Okay, so there are two types of relationship. One relationship is there's reporting entity and the person is related. Another relationship is there's a reporting entity and some another entity is related. Now when we talk about person, how we need to consider? If I am a reporting entity, then there are certain persons or close family members which get related. So if I am a reporting entity, if a person or a close family member of that person if that person has a control over me or joint control over me, that person also gets related, close family member of that person also gets related with me. Similarly, if that person has significant influence, similarly if that person is a KMP of mine or KMP of the parent of mine, in that case that person is also related and close family member of that person also gets related with me. Example, Mukesh Ambani controls A Limited. So for A Limited, Mukesh Ambani becomes related, even close family members of Mukesh Ambani becomes related to A Limited. Who are the close family members of that person who has that control, joint control, significant influence, or he is a KMP or he is a KMP of the parent? So who are the close family members of that person? It is that person's children, or that person's spouse, or that person's domestic partner, or that person's brother, sister, mother, father. Further, that spouse or that domestic partner can have different children also, they also become related to that person. Further, that person or that person's spouse or that person's domestic partners can have dependent, they are also the close family members of that person. And when that person becomes related, automatically the close family members of that person who are expected to influence that person are going to get influenced by that person, they also become related to the reporting entity. Clear? Next, parent company is defined. Parent is an entity who controls one or more subsidiary and prepares CFS, so that is the parent. Now, second, we go ahead with the next thing is relationship between a reporting entity and another entity or entities. Okay, so we study that in the form of charts. The chart number A is like this. If that reporting entity and another entity are members of the same group means parent and subsidiaries, or you can say sub-subsidiaries, subsidiary of a subsidiary. So if a reporting entity and entity are members of the same group, that is a group of parent and all the forms of subsidiaries, then they become related to each other. So if A has a subsidiary B and C, and that B has a subsidiary D and E, as C has a subsidiary F and G, all of them become related to all of them because they are members of the same group. Next, now next is like this. If there is an entity and that entity is joint venture or associate of another entity, if there is an entity and that entity is joint venture or associate of that another entity, then that two entity becomes related to each other. So if A holds 30% in B, so B is an associate of A, automatically A becomes related to B, B becomes related to A. Similarly, if A holds 50% of B and that B becomes a joint venture of A, so again A becomes related to B, B becomes related to, they become related to each other. Next, if the entity is an associate or joint venture of a member of a group, then that entity and all the other member of the group also become related. Example, there is a group known as H which has a subsidiary S and which has a subsidiary HS. So this H, S and HS become related party because they are members of same group. Now this subsidiary S has an associate AS. Now since this associate is an associate of a member of group, it becomes related to all the other members also of the group. They both become related to each other. Next is like this, that if there are two joint ventures with the common third party, then that two joint ventures become related. Example, Maruti and Suzuki form a joint venture MS Limited, Maruti and Bajaj form a joint venture MB Limited, then that MS Limited and MB Limited, they are two joint ventures of the same third party known as Maruti, then MS and MB becomes related party over there. Obviously the Suzuki and MS are related because for Suzuki MS is joint venture, Maruti and MS are related because for Maruti MS is joint venture, Maruti and MB are related because for Maruti that MB is joint venture, Bajaj and MB is related because for that Bajaj MB is a joint venture. However, Suzuki and Maruti don't become related to each other, Maruti and Bajaj don't become related to each other. Next, if one entity is a joint venture and another entity is the associate of the same third party, then that two entities are related. Example, H has an associate A and H has a joint venture J. So one is the associate and one is the joint venture of the same third party H. So A and J also become related. Obviously H and A are related because for H A is an associate. H and J are related because for H J is a joint venture. So they, but in fact A and J also becomes related because they are associate and joint venture of the same third party, so they also become related over there. Clear? Okay. Then I next go ahead is like this, that if there's a reporting entity and there's a post-employment plan, that post-employment plan is for the benefit of employees of the reporting entity or employees of an entity related to reporting entity, then for this reporting entity, this post-employment plan will be considered as a related party. So when that related, the reporting entity makes its financial statement, it will consider that post-employment plan as its related party because that post-employment plan is for the benefit of whom? The employees of the reporting entity or employees of the entity related to the reporting entity. Second way around. Sir, if we ourselves are post-employment plan, then if we ourselves are post-employment plan means we are a reporting entity which itself is a post-employment plan, then for us the sponsoring employers will be considered as the related party. Next, there were 2 points in your module which I clubbed and taught you. See, we started with all this point, we considered A, B, C, D, etc. and all. Then there were 2 points, F and G in your module. I had stricken off that thing from your module, but I had taught you separately in the form of chart, and that is G and H. The point is like this: when there are certain person or persons or close relative of that persons, now out of them one has a control or joint control in an entity, and either he or some other person has a control or joint control or significant influence or is a KMP or is a KMP of parent of some other entity, then these two entities become related. So if there is a person or persons or close relatives, okay, if there is a person or persons or close relative, if there is a person or persons or close relative, and at one place there is a control or joint control, and at other place there is a control or joint control or significant influence or KMP of the entity or KMP of the parent of the entity, then these two entities become related. Example, Mukesh Ambani controls Reliance, Neeta Ambani controls Reliance Foundation. Mukesh Ambani and Neeta Ambani are close relatives. In that case, since there is control at both the places, RIL and RF becomes related. Okay, the next example which I gave you was Mr. A is a KMP of A Limited and Mrs. A is a KMP of B Limited. That's it. Mr. A, Mrs. A, husband-wife relationship. Now, but at the both place there is a KMP only, then they are not related. At least at one place there should be control, joint control. At other place you can have control, joint control, significant influence, KMP of the entity, KMP of the parent of the entity, still no problem. But at both the places you have just KMP or both the places you have just significant influence, then that two entities don't be there. Obviously, Mr. A will become related with A Limited, Mrs. A will become related with B Limited, but A Limited and B Limited will not be related over there. Okay, next we had studied that associate includes subsidiary of associate. Associate includes subsidiary of associate means A Limited has a associate B Limited. So A Limited, B Limited related. Now that B Limited has a subsidiary C Limited. So that C Limited is a subsidiary of associate for A Limited. So from A Limited point of view, you have an associate, that associate as a subsidiary, that will be treated as like your associate only. So for A Limited, even C Limited is an associate only. So automatically A and C will also become related over there. So if our associate has a subsidiary, that is like our associate only. Similarly, if our joint venture has a subsidiary, that is like our joint venture only. Okay. Now then we had considered few examples which I had given you, and you had given answers, so the answers are also given. This is the example over there. Okay, Now, so we had considered certain examples over there, and who are related parties in that example, we had considered that also. A Limited is the main company, subsidiary B, associate C, associate D, that associate D as a subsidiary E, etc. And I've given the answer, so you can accordingly pause and view it once for which party who all are related, for C who are related, and all the points are discussed earlier out of this. Next comes like this, that if A has an associate B and that B has an associate C, will A and C be related? See, A has an associate B, so A be related. B has an associate C, so B and C related. But A and C cannot get related because it's an associate of an associate. But you had taught earlier, I had taught that if our associate has a subsidiary, then it is our subsidiary. But in this sum, our associate has an associate, that does not become our associate. If our associate has a subsidiary, then that is also our associate. But if our associate has an associate, then he does not become anything for us. So A and C will not be related then. Okay, this was a good example. Accordingly, there were module examples also which you can consider and try to evaluate on the own whether you are able to get the correct answers of that related party or not. Okay, then next point was like this. So in this discussion, what I did was F and G was discussed out of this. Okay, then what I do is next I discuss certain definitions related to F and G. In your F and G, at one place there should be control, joint control, and at other place there should be control or joint control or significant influence or KMP of that entity or KMP of the parent of the entity. All that things should be there. Okay, so what do you mean by control, joint control, significant influence? So Ind AS says that, Ind AS 24 says, I will not define this control, joint control, significant influence. This will be the same as defined in Ind AS 110, Ind AS 111, Ind AS 28. You just need to use that over here. Okay, so accordingly the same copy paste definitions are given. Control means you have a power over the investee, and when you are exposed to or you have a right to variable returns from the involvement with investee, but since you have control, you have an ability to change that, affect that returns also. So that was that definition. I'll teach you more detail in Ind AS 110, not now. Next, joint control means unanimous consent is required. Significant influence means you can participate but you cannot control. That were the key words. Then the key management personnel. Yes, key management personnel is defined over there. Key management personnel means person who has the authority and responsibility for planning, directing, controlling. Okay, planning, directing, controlling the activities of the enterprise directly or indirectly. Now it may be denoted as director, it may not be denoted as director, it may be executive, it may not be executive, it does not matter. You have to look for that persons who are responsible for planning, directing, controlling the activities of the entity directly or indirectly, whether they are named as director, whether they are non-named as director, and in the director also whether they are executive, not executive. You have to look at the person. That is important. Now function is important over there, so that is given over there. Okay, and the KMP becomes related to the main entity, that we all know. So accordingly all the definitions are given over there. Okay, then I considered few special case to make you all understand H. Now how I made you all understand H, it is like this on the board. First I give you a basic example. If there is an entity or member of group, and that entity or member of group provides KMP services, that entity or member of group provides KMP services to reporting entity or parent of reporting entity. So there is entity or member of group, they are providing KMP services to reporting entity or parent of reporting entity, then they become related. Example is like this. Let us say there is a company F Limited. F Limited company is providing key management personnel services to A Limited. Now A Limited has subsidiary B, subsidiary C, subsidiary D, and that A Limited has a E, which you can say associate or joint venture. To make you understand, you can take it as an associate also, you can take it as a joint venture also, no problem with me. Okay, so there is a company F Limited, that F Limited provides KMP services to A Limited. A Limited is parent for B, C, D. B, C, D are subsidiary. E you can either take it as associate, no problem. E you can either take it as joint venture, then also no problem. Now, since F is providing KMP services to the parent of a reporting entity, F becomes related to A also, F becomes related to B also, F becomes related to C also, F becomes related to D also. Why F becomes related to A? When F becomes related to A, because it is providing services to reporting entity A. Why F becomes related to B? Because F is providing services to parent of B, so it becomes related to B also. And accordingly, F point of view, F is related to A, B, C, D. Clear? Now, then I told you that you need to understand certain nomenclature. When there's a parent, then the parent has investment in subsidiaries. Parent, subsidiary, that words are used together. When there's associate joint venture, we say investor has invested in associate. So when I say of A and D, I say A is an investor in E, because that E is either associate joint venture. But when I talk of A and B, I say A is a parent, B is a subsidiary. But when I talk of A and D, A becomes the investor, E becomes the associate or joint venture. This is how they are named also. So basically it's like this, that if someone entity or member of group is providing KMP services to the reporting entity or the parent of reporting, they themselves become related to each other. Then I expanded one example, which was a general example. There was no KMP services over there. KMP services no one was providing to no one over there. KMP is different, KMP services are different. You need to understand that. Mr. A is a KMP of a company, he himself is a KMP. KMP services, like one company providing KMP services to another company and taking service charges. That is a different thing. So at some places we considered KMP, at some places we considered KMP services also. Next example is without that KMP thing. Now what is that example? Now example is, there's a company A Limited. It has subsidiary B, it has subsidiary C, it has subsidiary D, it has an associate E. The associate E has a subsidiary F. There is no KMP. Now what we understand is, A has a subsidiary B, C, D. Okay, it has an associate. Associate has a subsidiary. If an associate has a subsidiary, it is considered as an associate of A also. So basically for A, E and F both are subsidiary, B, C, D. So from F point of view, who all are related? That was my question. F point of view, if you think F is indirectly associate of E, so directly associate of E, so it is related. F is indirectly associate of A, so A is also related. So from F point of view, E is related. From F point of view, A is related. Now, since F point of view A is related, F is an associate of A, so F becomes automatically related to all the other members of a group in which A is a member. So F becomes related to B, C, D also. This was that example which I taught you. Okay. So from F point of view, that B, C, D also becomes related. Next example which I gave you was this example where I brought in the concept of KMP. In the same diagram, A is the parent, B, C, D is the subsidiary, E is the associate, E associate as a subsidiary F. Further, the F provides KMP services to A also, just I put. So even if it does not matter, F provides KMP services to A, that's an extra point, but in fact, F point of view, all of them are related only. And this is what your ICI example is also there. So that ICI example given over there, I have one single example I have discussed as 3 different examples over there. But see, basically the ICI example should have concentrated on the first one, this one, the KMP. Then there was something without KMP, and then the third thing I mixed it, but it does not matter much. The third thing is given by the ICI over there, but we have considered it as a 3 different examples. Everyone clear? Yes, sir. Next. Once we are done with this much, then we consider what are not related parties. What are not related parties? Simply because there is a common director, simply because there is a person who is a KMP at both places, that 2 entities does not become related. A is a director in A Limited also, A is a director in B Limited. It's just a director, he is just a KMP. If A is just a KMP in A Limited, if A is just a KMP in B Limited, that A Limited, B Limited never becomes related. Obviously, but if A controls B and A controls C, then that B and C can become related. So basically 2 entities does not become related because simply because the director or KMP is common over there. Okay. So basically it can be like this. Mr. A is a KMP in A Limited, Mr. A is a KMP in B Limited. So that A Limited, B Limited cannot become related. Obviously Mr. A and A Limited, they are related. Mr. A and B Limited, they are related. But this A Limited, B Limited, they cannot become related. Clear? Similarly, if that Mr. A has significant influence in A Limited and that Mr. A is a KMP of B Limited, then yes, Mr. A and A Limited related, Mr. A and B Limited related, but A and B Limited cannot be, because at one place there is significant influence and at what place they are KMP. Now you need to understand that, when there's a persons etc., at one place you need control, joint control, and at other place you can have control, joint control, significant influence, KMP of entity, KMP of A, then that two entities become related. That was point F and G, I guess. Yeah, so only significant influence at one place and KMP at other, that will not suffice over there. Okay, that will not suffice over there. Then next, I go ahead. Next point is like this. We have considered who all are not related. Next point is in who all two venturers are not, means basically J and V form a joint venture JV. So J and V cannot become related over there. Yeah. Then there can be certain people like provider of finance, trade unions, etc. They do not control, joint control or significantly influence you, but by the virtue of normal dealings with you, they affect your freedom somewhere. They might somewhere participate in decision making. Obviously, they do not control, joint control, significantly influence you. Then they are not related party. Similarly, there can be certain customers, suppliers, franchise, distributors, etc. And because of their because of the transactions with them, there's some economic dependence with them. We have so much transactions with them, we have some economic dependence with them. Obviously, they are not controlling, joint controlling, etc. But there's some economic dependence which is there. Then they do not become related to us. Okay. So that was all. Next comes related party transactions. Related party transaction is just a list that if there is transfer of resources, services, obligation between the reporting entity and that related party can be person also, that related party can be entity also. So that is a related party transaction. It can be purchase, sale of goods, it can be purchase, sale of asset, it can be rendering service, receiving service, it can be lease, it can be license, it can be loan, it can be financing, guarantee, commitments, etc., etc., etc. So that's just a list which can go on, we cannot by heart. Other important definition, compensation is given. That's a time pass definition where see, KMP we have studied, and entity and KMP is related, and further in next points we are going to study that compensation paid to KMP has to be disclosed. What is compensation paid to KMP? It can be short-term employee benefit, it can be post-employment benefit, it can be other long-term employee benefit, it can be termination benefit. In fact, share-based payment can also be known as compensation to them. So even if that is covered in 19, it is covered over here. Even if it is covered in 102, it is covered. All the compensation given to KMP is covered over here in the form of disclosure. Means you will disclose it as a compensation given to KMP as a transaction with related party. You will disclose it. Okay. Next, government and government related entity is defined because there are some exemptions to them. Government means government agencies, similar bodies which are at local, national or international level. Government related entity means the entity which is controlled, joint controlled or influenced by government. So if I am controlled, joint controlled or influenced by government, I become government related entity, and that other government can be local, national, international also. Now, so disclosure. Now comes the main part of the standard. Once we are done with all these definitions, we go to understand out of this what are disclosed. So there are two categories of disclosure. First category of disclosure is you will give the name, that is relationship only, even if there is transaction or even if there is no transaction. So whose name you need to give in category 1? You need to name your parent and the ultimate controlling party. So you have to give the name of the parent also. Yes. You have to give the name of ultimate controlling party. Yes. That ultimate controlling party can be entity, it can be person, no problem. You have to name it. Example, let us say it is like this. There's a company H which has a subsidiary S1, which has a subsidiary S2, which has a subsidiary S3, which has a subsidiary S4. Means H has a subsidiary S1, S1 has a subsidiary S2, so on so forth, so on so forth. Now let us say we are thinking from S4 point of view. S4 has to disclose the name of its parent, that is S3, and the ultimate controlling party H. The name will be disclosed. See, my parent is S3, my ultimate controlling party is H. The relation with them will be disclosed as their parent or ultimate controlling party. That will be disclosed over here. Okay, in this point. Further, there is an extra disclosure. Extra means always S4 is going to disclose the name of S3 and H. Over and above that, there will be extra disclosure which will be made by S4 over here if we are thinking from S4 point of view. What is that extra disclosure which is made by S4 over there? Extra disclosure made by S4 over there is like this, that from S4 point of view, the parent and the ultimate controlling party both don't make CFS form don't make CFS which is available for public use, then that S4 will also give name of the next most senior parent which makes CFS which is available for public use. So let us say in our example we are thinking from S4 point of view. S4 has to name S3 and H, but let us say if S3 and H both don't make CFS which is available for public use, then S4 will also be required to give over and above H and S3 names. Over and above H and S3 will always be disclosed by S4, but over and above H and S3, S4 will also have to name the next most, not just most, next most senior parent which does so. So let us say the next most senior parent is S2 and he makes CFS which is available for public use. In that case, S4 will also give the name of S2 as the next most senior parent which makes CFS. If S1 and S2 both makes CFS, still for S4 the next senior most parent which makes CFS will be S2 only, provided H1 and H2 does not provided H and S3 does not make the CFS. Conclusion is like that. If S3 does not make CFS but H makes the CFS, still from S4 point of view the name of S3 and H will only be there. If S3 makes CFS, H does not make CFS which is available for public use, still from S4 point of view name of S3 and H will only be disclosed. However, if S3 does not make CFS for public use, H also does not make CFS for public use, S2 and S1 makes CFS for public use available, then S4 will disclose the name of S3 that will be there, H that will always be there, plus S2 will be there. S2 is the next most senior parent which makes CFS available for public use. Accordingly, everything is given over there. Okay, then there are few time pass paragraphs. Then comes category 2 disclosure. In category 2 disclosure also there are 2 points. The point number 1 is compensation to KMP. If I am an entity, I have paid to KMP person, then I will have to disclose the total compensation, plus I have to give the bifurcation out of that, how much is short-term employee benefit, how much is post-employment benefit, how much is other long-term employee benefit, how much is termination benefit, how much is share-based payment. Clear? You need to be careful over here. In this point, if I am an entity and I am paying to my KMP a compensation, that is disclosed. However, if I am an entity and I am receiving KMP service from some another entity, I am paying service charges for the same, that is not disclosed over here, that will be disclosed in the next point. Clear? So if I am an entity, I am paying to my KMPs, literally the compensation paid to KMP is given over here and compensation was defined earlier as all of them. Next, disclosures where second disclosures over there is disclosure only when there is a transaction. Okay, now what is there? In category 2 there is a second point over there. This disclosure will come only if there is a transaction. So if there cannot be a case where there can be related party relationship and there is no transaction, then there will be no disclosures over here in this point. So in this point you will disclose only if there is a transaction. Now if there is a transaction with related party, what all you need to disclose? You need to disclose the nature of that related party relationships. Further, you have to disclose information regarding that related party transaction, the outstanding balances, the commitments that will have the amount of the transaction, the amount of the outstanding balances, the amount of the commitments, the terms and conditions, whether they are secured or not, etc., the nature of consideration, the details of guarantee. Further, if anything is receivable, have we created a RDD? Is any amount recognized as bad or doubtful debt in your P&L? You need to give disclosures regarding the same also. Further, if I am an entity and I am taking key management personal services from some person, the compensation paid to them, that will be disclosed over here. Further, all the above disclosures will be given in a proper manner category wise. So yes, a lot of disclosures are required over here. Now in category 1, only name is given even if transaction is there or not there. In category 2, compensation to KMP is given, and further any other related party relationship if transaction is disclosure. So there are so many different types of related party. How you will give disclosure? You will try to arrange it in a proper category and present that disclosure properly. Further, if you are telling that this transaction is at arm's length price, then you can tell that only if you can substantiate the same. See, let us say I have done a transaction with related party, I am disclosing that related party transaction with all the details required above, and I am also writing over that this is at arm's length transaction. Then wait, I can write that only if I can substantiate, means I will have to substantiate over that why I am telling that this transaction is at arm's length price, or else don't write that, okay. Next, further, sometimes it can happen with that there are two related parties. I am related with some entity and I have to give disclosures, and between us there are so many transactions. So can I aggregate? Similar transactions can be aggregated, no problem with that. But if separate disclosure is necessary for understanding, then separate disclosure should be given. So if there are 100 transactions which are quite similar in nature, you can aggregate. But one of them is different, which is it is necessary to disclose it separately for understanding purpose, then we'll have to give that separate disclosure also. Clear? Then there's certain exemptions available to government related entity. What is the exemption available to government related entity? Let us say I am an entity and government is my related party, or if I am an entity, some other entity is related to me because of that government. So I am an entity, government is related to me, or I am an entity, some other entity is related to me because of that government, then exemption is available, but this exemption is partial exemption. Still you need to disclose the name of that government. You need to disclose the nature of that government relationship with the entity. You need to disclose the nature and amount of individually significant transaction. Further, if the transactions are not individually significant but they are significant in aggregate, then disclosures are there. Obviously disclosures are less than the regular disclosure, but some disclosures are there, and further entity is expected to apply the judgment to decide whether they are significant or not, and accordingly what to be disclosed. A very important thing is, if I am an entity, government is related to me, in relation to that some exemptions are there, but some things are disclosed. If I am an entity, some other entity is related to me because of that government, some exemptions are there, something has to be disclosed. But if I am an entity and some other person is related to me because of that government, in that case there is no benefit available, okay. And there are certain examples given over there. Then we have distinguish. These distinguish are simple ones. In AS, the word use is relative. In Ind AS, that's a distinguish between Ind AS 24 and AS 18. In Ind AS, the word uses close members of the family. AS, the word uses relative. Obviously, relative is a narrower word which only has spouse, son, daughter, brother, sister, mother, father. But close member of the family, which is used in Ind AS, it's quite large, and that we have studied earlier, quite wider. Further, in AS, what they do, in relation to government, they use a word state controlled enterprise, means an entity controlled by central government or state government, that's it. So AS is narrower there. Again, over here in Ind AS, what we have, we tell it is a government related entity, and government related entity is defined in such a wide manner. First, the government is defined as government agency, government body, which can be at local, national or international level. For the government related body, government related entity means an entity which is controlled either by government, or it is joint controlled by government, or it is significantly influenced by government. So again, there's a wider implication. Next, in case of KMP, in AS only KMP is considered of that entity. In Ind AS we consider the KMP of the entity, we consider the KMP of the parent of the entity. Further, in Ind AS we had a point that if the key management personnel services, KMP services is also covered. In fact, in Ind AS we had KMP services provided to an entity or parent of entity, etc. There were some related party relationships. Okay, next, in Ind AS, joint venture and associates are considered in a particular manner. AS, it is considered in particular manner. I am not much concerned over there with AS, but in Ind AS we have clearly discussed A and B together form a joint venture, that A, B are not related. But when there are two joint ventures with same related party, Maruti Suzuki form a joint venture, Maruti Bajaj form a joint venture, so that Maruti Suzuki and Maruti Bajaj has a common third party known as Maruti, then that two joint ventures are related. Clear? If I am a company, I have one joint venture and I have one associate, they are related. So all that things I have clearly discussed with you all in Ind AS, so that is critical over there. Next, there is a point where that point is there in AS but not there in Ind AS, a rare thing. In AS it is given that sometimes there can be certain certain influence, you can say certain influences, that certain influences do not result into transaction. There are certain influences, but that influences do not result into transaction and they are difficult to find out, then disclosure is not required. But that point itself is vague, so that point is not there in Ind AS. Now in case of post-employment benefit, we had a point in Ind AS that was not there in AS. In case of next most senior parent, that was there in Ind AS but not there in AS. Compensation to KMP, detailed disclosure in Ind AS, less detailed in AS. Okay, in Ind AS they say when you disclose that related party transaction, always that amount of that transaction should be disclosed. In Ind AS they say, AS gives you an option over there. AS says that either you can disclose it as a percentage or you can give as an amount, that option, but that will lead to certain issues. So Ind AS is very strict over there. Ind AS says that whenever related party transactions are disclosed, you need to give the amount. AS was like you can give as a percentage or you can give amount, no problem. That's an option in AS, but Ind AS is strict over there. Government related entity disclosures, there's partial exemption in Ind AS. Government related entities, there's a partial exemption in Ind AS, but in AS full exemption is there. Next, in Ind AS certain words are neither defined nor clarified, like control, etc. In Ind AS 24 it is never done because it refers to another Ind AS only. AS 18 has given some clarification and that's all about that distinguish. I had asked you all to do the illustrations on your own. When you do that illustrations on your own, in illustration number 4, you can do the changes like this. Examine the exemption for disclosure to be given to entity A. You can put it like this and then it will make sense. Okay, and then in your test your knowledge, it's all fine. Okay, accordingly you can test your knowledge over there, and we are done with a super quick revision of Ind AS 24. So now let us revise Ind AS 108 operating segments. The purpose of this standard is disclosures. The principle of the standard is that the user should get to evaluate the nature and financial effect of the business entities. User should be able to understand the economic environment in which the entity operates. Basically, user should get the information from the same perspective as that of the management, and in that case user will be able to take a better informed decision. How it can happen? Management views a company. How it views a company? If the company has 10 different operations, management views them as a 10 different operating segments and it has the reports of all of them and it takes decision. So accordingly, users should also get that decision. That's a core of the standard. So now what's the scope of the standard? If Ind AS is applicable to a company, then Ind AS 108 is applicable. That's it. There's no other thing that you have segments, you don't have segments. It's a very simple thing. If Ind AS is applicable to company, then Ind AS 108 is applicable. In future, it can happen that for some entities, Ind AS is applicable but Ind AS 108 is not applicable. That can happen, but that's not that important at all. Further, if you have CFS and SFS both, then it is mandatory that you give this segment information in the CFS or the disclosures of this standard in CFS. But in SFS you want to give, you can give. You don't want to give, you cannot give, no problem, but provided you make both. Okay, if I'm making only one thing, then though I have to give this disclosures of the standard. Then what do you mean by operating segment? Operating segments, they are the component of the entity. Operating segments, they are the component of the entity, okay, from which entity may earn the revenue and incur the expenses. It can be internal, external, both. Okay, further, the CODM reviews them regularly to make decisions regarding the resources to be allocated and assess the performance, and for which discrete financial information is available. Then we can say, okay, this is the operating segment. So I am operating in 3 businesses, let us say real estate and log division and FMCG division, and for all of them, if all the 3 conditions are satisfied, they may earn revenue, they may incur expenses. The CODM reviews them regularly for this, and the discrete financial information, separate financial information is available. Then I can say all of them are operating segments. For being an operating segment, A, B, C, all of the 3 have to be fulfilled. So why it is written may earn revenue? Because startups can also be included. Then accordingly, few examples are given. Okay, CODM is a function and not a single person. Basically, it can be group of person, it can be a single person, also it can be group of person. It's a function. CODM is a function. Clear? Sometimes it can happen that there are some part of the business which is not a part of any segment, okay, like corporate assets, etc. So they will come in other reconciliation items. Let us say I want to show segment assets, I will show segment assets of A, B, C, D. Other segments I will show. Then I will have something known as reconciliation items, where I will put that corporate corporate HO, which is neither part of basic segments, which is neither a part of other segments also. Basically, it's not a part of any other segment. It will come in RICO. Okay, so what happens, generally I'll show you how the disclosures happen is, let us say a company has many segments. Out of that, few are reportable segments. So let us say company has 10 to 15 segments. So out of that, few become reportable segment, and we give the disclosures of, let us say, A, B, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Some are clubbed and disclosed, let us say 4 and 5, and then balance get other columns. Now in that also, how the RICO happens. RICO happens like this, that we show that segment information like segment asset 1, 2, 3, others is there, and then there's some things which is not allocated to 1, 2, 3 segments also, not allocated to the other segments also, and then it is allocated as a RICO, and then you tally with the assets of the balance sheet. This is just an example. Okay, sometimes an entity has a matrix form of organization, and then it is not able to determine the segments. Then it has to refer the core principles and accordingly decide the segments, and accordingly illustration number 2 is given over there, where both the product wise and geographical location wise data is available, and on the face you are not able to decide what are the operating segments. Okay, then go to the core principles and decide. Now out of the operating segments, what are the reportable operating segments? Reportable operating segment can be an individual component of an entity, individual operating segment which satisfies the quantitative limit, or it can be aggregate of 2 or more segments, and that aggregate satisfies that quantitative limit. So when you can aggregate only if they have similar operations, that aggregation is consistent with the core principles, they have similar economic characteristics, they are similar in the nature of products and services, they are similar in the production processes, type of customers, method used to distribute, regulatory environment, then that operating segments can be clubbed, and we can aggregate. On aggregate we can check whether it fulfills that quantitative limit or not, and accordingly we can disclose it. Okay, example given over there was Britannia biscuit and Britannia cake. Maybe they might be considered as operating segments which can be aggregated and then checked for the quantitative thresholds. So what are the quantitative thresholds? These are very, very important. If you fulfill any of this quantitative threshold, you become a reportable segment. Example, the revenue of that operating segment, both internal and external revenue of that operating segment is 10% or more of the total internal external revenue combined of all the segments, then it becomes a reportable segment. Similarly, absolute amount of that reported profit or loss, absolute means ignore the negative sign, absolute amount of that reported profit or loss of that particular operating segment is 10% or more of greater in the absolute terms of the following 2 things: combined profit of all the operating segments which reported profit, combined losses of all the operating segment which reported losses. Sir, example is like this. Let us say there are 5 segments A, B, C, D, E. They have the profit and losses: 100 profit, 200 loss, 50 profit, 100 loss, 100 profit. Okay, now what we need to consider? First we need to consider all the segments with profit, total of that, all the segments with loss, total of that, higher of the 2 should be considered, and 10% limit should be considered. So we get 30. All the segments which have absolute amount either of profit or loss more than equal to 30, then they all become reportable, and therefore all A, B, C, D, E becomes reportable over here. Okay, then the next point is, if the assets of that operating segment are 10% or more of the combined assets of all operating segment, then that segment again becomes a reportable one. If A is fulfilled, then also reportable, B, C fulfilled, then also reportable, any of them fulfilled, reportable. Over and above that, if the management feels that even if the threshold is not fulfilled, but management believes that it is important for the user's understanding, then it can become a reportable segment over there. Clear? After that, you need to check one more thing, the 75% criteria. What is that 75% criteria? What all segments you have reported? Let us say you have reported A, B, C out of all the segments. Then whatever segments you have reported, take the external revenue of the reported segments. Take the external revenue of the reported segment. That should be more than equal to 75% of the total external revenue of the entity. In that case, you have fulfilled this criteria. If you have not fulfilled the criteria, then have an additional segment so that this criteria is fulfilled. Clear? Now, last year the segment was a reportable segment. Okay. Now, in this year it does not fulfill the condition quantitative limits. Then, if the management consider this it as having a continuous significance, then it can be a reportable one, or else it will not be reportable. Clear? Another way around, in the current year, if there's a new reportable segment, then what to do? The prior period data which is presented, that has to be restated unless that information is not available and the cost of information obtaining that information is excessive then. So normally, if the in current year new reportable segment, then in the current year financial statement, current year column it will be there, the previous year column will be restated. In the current year financial statements, the previous year column will be restated and given, unless the cost of developing that information is very high and information is not available and cost of developing information is very high. A practical limit, there's no specific practical limit, but then once the reportable segment crosses 10, then they check and they ask you, okay, check yourself whether the practical limit has been exceeded, because you know how many operable segments are there, that much column will be there in the current year also and the previous year also, it becomes cumbersome. So what disclosures have to be made? Disclosures have to be made in such a manner that enable the users to understand the nature and the financial effect of the business and activities of that entity and the economic environment in which operates, so that they can make better decisions. So this is a copy paste from the core principle, and based on that there are three types of disclosures. A is a general information disclosure, B is the information regarding segment profit or loss, segment revenue, segment expenses, segment assets, segment liabilities, etc. And then there's a reconciliation disclosure which is there. Okay, in general information, what we disclose is we just disclose how the entity identified the reportable segments, the judgment used for aggregation, the types of product services, etc. That's it. In profit and loss disclosure, what we do generally is the profit and loss for each reportable segment, that is reported profit, total assets, total liabilities of that each reportable segment, they are disclosed as provided to CODM. So profit and loss of the segment as provided to CODM, that is reviewed. Assets and liabilities as provided to CODM, that is accordingly disclosed over there. Over and above, revenue from external customers, revenue from transaction within the entity, interest revenue, interest expense, depreciation, amortization, certain material items under Ind AS 1, interest in profit and loss from associate, joint venture, income tax, income expenses, etc. Material non-cash item other than depre amortization. This all extra revenue and expense will be disclosed even if it is not a part of segment P&L. Even it's there, even it's not there, provided this is reviewed by CODM or made available to CODM. Okay, interest expense and interest income, you have to show it separately, but if your main business is earning interest only and the CODM reviews it accordingly basis on the basis of net interest only, then instead of showing interest revenue, interest expense separately, you can show the net interest also. In case of assets, you have to disclose the segment assets, that's fine. Over and above that segment asset, you need to disclose the amount of investment made in associate, joint venture, and amount of additions to the non-current assets other than financial instruments, deferred tax asset, net defined benefit asset, insurance contract, etc. Even if they are part of segment assets or not, you have to disclose it separately, provided it is available to CODM. CODM reviews it regularly. Okay, then in measurement thing, we studied that when you are disclosing as per Ind AS 108, the amount, the measurement of that item should be based on the measure used to report to CODM, even if it's different from the measure used to report in financial statements of the entity. If there's only one measure used to report to CODM, then there will be no problem. In our operating segment disclosures or this Ind AS disclosures, that measure will be used. Okay, but the CODM uses more than one measure. In that case, that measure which is most consistent with the measure used in the financial statements can be used. Further, there are some few extra things which you need to give over there. Okay, if the measures are different, then you need to disclose regarding the same, that this is a measure used for CODM and therefore given in the operating segment disclosure, but this is the measure which is there in the financial statements, etc. You need to do. Then further, the mains eco will come, where the total of the reportable segments revenue will be reconciled with the entity revenue. Total of the reportable segments profit and loss will be reconciled with the entity's profit and loss. Normally the profit and loss reconciliation will be before tax, because tax you cannot generally bifurcate. Okay, but if the tax you are able to bifurcate, allocate it to segments, then the profit and loss reconciliation can be after tax also over there. Total of reportable segment assets can be reconciled with the total assets of the entity. Total of reportable segments liability can be reconciled with the entity liability. Other amount disclosed should also be accordingly reconciled. Accordingly, reconciliation example is given over there. Okay, if the internal organization of the company, internal structure of the company changes, then in the current period the segment information published will get changed. So the previous year data you need to restate and give it, unless the information is not available and the cost of developing that information is excessive. In that case also, what you can do, if you are not giving that, if you are not restating that prior period data, then one more thing what you can do is, in the current year you can give the segment information by both the bases, the new basis also and the old basis also, because internal structure has changed. So you can give that data. Again, there's an exception over here that either that information is not available and the cost of obtaining that information is excessive, then you're not giving, then fine, but the fact will be disclosed. Then there are certain entity wide disclosures which are made. These are made even if you don't have multiple segments also at all. You have to give this entity wide disclosure. Further, one more thing, if anything is already disclosed in the disclosures which are to be done in Ind AS 108, which we had studied earlier, then it will not be disclosed again. But if the some things which are there over here and they are not disclosed earlier, then it will be disclosed over here. Information about product and services will be disclosed over here. Okay, unless the information is not available and the cost of developing. So revenue from external customers for each product and services. From this product and services, this much revenue, this much expenses, etc. So this much revenue is there from this product, this services, that you need to disclose, unless that information is not available or cost of developing that information is excessive. If you are not disclosing, fact should be disclosed. And over here the best part is the amount will be that based which are there in, amount will be that only, amount will be that only which are there in your financial statements. Amount will be that only that which are there in your financial statements. Similarly, geographical information will also be disclosed. Now in geographical information, revenue from external customers which are attributed to country of domicile, that will be disclosed. For all foreign countries together will be disclosed. Individual foreign countries which are material, that will be disclosed. So revenues, geographical location wise revenue will also be disclosed. Geographical location wise non-current asset will also be disclosed, that this is from country of domicile. Country of domicile means where it is registered, and then all other foreign countries together. If any foreign country is individually material, then disclosed. Okay, in all these cases, geographical information where revenue and assets, two things are disclosed in geographical information, the revenue and the non-current assets. Okay, you need to make sure that the amount used over there in this entity wide disclosure is same as that of the financial statement if you are giving that entity wide disclosure separately over there. Okay, then information about major customers also should be given. Major customers, generally 10% or more of the total external revenue comes from that customer, then I can say that's a major customer. The information regarding the same should be given, that there's some customer like that, this is the amount of that customer, it belongs to this segments. Okay, name you need not disclose, that fine. And that also, if you don't disclose how much amount of revenue from which segment, that also you don't disclose, that fine. You can disclose that the revenue is from segment 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C, but you need not disclose this much amount of revenue from this segment. Okay, total revenue you can directly disclose. Name of that person also you don't disclose, that's fine. Okay, then there's certain distinguish between AS and Ind AS over there. In AS 17, which is mechanical in approach, Ind AS 108, Ind AS 108 is of management view. So the first disclosure over there is if Ind AS is applicable, Ind AS 108 is applicable. In AS 17 is applicable only to non-SMCs. Next, in Ind AS we decide the segments based on how the information is reviewed by CODM, means management approach is there. In AS there were two segments, the geographical segments or business segments, depending upon risk and return approach, risk and reward approach. Management view was not considered in AS. Now in Ind AS, measurement is that which is used by CODM in Ind AS, and therefore RECO is there, we reconcile it with the financial statements. In AS the measurement is that same as used in the financial statement. In Ind AS, segment assets, segment liabilities, segment revenue, they are not defined because they are same as pursued by the management. But in AS, they are defined also. In Ind AS, there is something known as aggregation criteria, which is not there in AS. Okay, in Ind AS, we have entity-wide disclosure, and therefore, even if you have a single reportable segment, you have to disclose. In fact, Ind AS 108, you have to follow it. In AS, it was like you disclose for primary and secondary segments, that's it. There is nothing known as entity wise disclosure over there in AS, and that's it. That's all about that very quick revision. Questions you can go through in Test Your Knowledge. Question number 2, just external sale, make it as gross including GST, and tax, make it as GST, then everything will make sense over there. Okay, so we are done with a very super quick revision over there.